Hello, everyone. I'm Dan Winter, and it's November 1, and this is the fractalfield.com, fractalu.com video education series. This conversation is entitled Kundalini, Ascension, and the Practical Experience of the Science of Spirit and Bliss. And this is a follow-up from earlier conversations, particularly the newest YouTube film that we made in the Ascension 2020 series on our YouTube channel, Fractal Field. And that film was kind of a hit. We had over 1,000 views a day, and there was lots of interest. And Alan Steinfeld kindly asked lots of questions about the physics of Ascension. And we made it pretty clear in there, the background science there. In fact, we have some of those images here. That what we discussed there was here, this image where you see when your brainwave harmonics here, in this case my brainwave harmonics, here's 5 frequencies in golden ratio from flameinmind.com, and we're happy to see now more and more people are making golden ratio in their brainwaves and having that experience. And then the heart harmonics from realheartcoherence.com, we see that instead of a golden ratio cascade, you actually have an octave cascade in heart harmonics, and that triggers what is measurable in the DNA, which is in this top center picture, where you see the difference in the density of the enzyme associated with braid density in the DNA, measured dramatically increases before versus after DNA is exposed to heart coherence, the phonon geometry of your heart singing coherently, which is what my originally credited invention of the discovery of the term heart coherence means, that it causes your DNA to braid, essentially implode. And from there we have essentially this picture here where you see the recursive braiding of DNA responds to that phonon geometry piezoelectrically, and the braid density, literally the plot thickens, and the braid within the braid within the braid, as it were, becomes phase coherent, and that creates an electrical situation which, like the golden ratio harmonics that I newly proved is the geometry of hydrogen, and the hydrogen is the center of every ladder rung codon bond in DNA, that essentially that triggers a condition that the DNA electrically literally gets centripetal and implodes. And that creates this motion of the transverse electromagnetic here down this spiral on the cone, the perfect vortex, which converts transverse electromagnetics down that toothpaste tube and squirts through the speed of light at exactly the threshold of Planck at the nozzle of the toothpaste tube out into a compressional wave, sometimes called longitudinal or scalar. And the longitudinal wave then propagates faster than light measurably and enables action at a distance. And that, simply put, is the physics of the etheric body, the so-called astral adventures, remote viewing, and clearly the collective unconscious and the communion of saints. And the physics of Hey Ave, the breath of charge taking flight, sometimes called heaven, which the Jewish tradition calls the plains of Sharon, which Lawrence Gardner correctly surmised was the virtually unlimited unpacking of the valence electron shell symmetry of monatomic gold. And it's the same condition that phase conjugate electrical symmetry means the rose petal geometry of the electric field of monatomic gold can unpack virtually in an unlimited way, that it's literally a rose-shaped fractal field. And that electrical geometry, originally the name of the electrical field around monatomic gold, became the word plains of Sharon, as Lawrence Gardner writes about, and is their word for heaven, where charge distribution is enabled, and therefore you have gone to the next dimension, as it were. And it's called the next dimension because the number of harmonics that are superposed as superposed axes of span of charge rotation increases. And that corresponds to the increase in the number of harmonics measurable in your heart arch. And harmonic inclusiveness in heart rate variability is the premier way simply to measure immune health. So as you reach those increasing harmonics, you do that ascension process. And your aura becomes more dense and you experience that implosion. So that's a little background. Now, this conversation was to be more about some of the practical practices and hygiene and, shall we say, experience of Kundalini. Now, more and more people are writing about having Kundalini experiences, and we think this planet is, as the compression geometries around the planet, it has to do with the moon and many things that we know about. The Christians call it the rapture, but it's basically a situation of increasing plasma compression, within which area only permissive harmonics can propagate, which in Christian terms or psychological terms is only the shareable waves survive what you need to do to get ready to die successfully, for example. So how that is perceived, how that's felt, how that's experienced, and how the hygiene can assist that process in the Kundalini science is what we wanted to talk about here. And if you will bear with me for just a few more minutes of the science, then I can maybe tell my story a little bit more personally, and maybe that will make it interesting. I don't consider remember, personality worship is not really mature, and I consider that a weakness of Earth's religions. But the physics of spirit, so we called it the Jesus physics, which is our goldenmean.info/Jesus physics article went viral, because we see that much of spiritual traditions on this planet, and most all traditions, have a core set of informations which is really reflected in the science of spiritual evolution. And our suggestion is strongly that when we drop the miracle worship and the personality worship, it isn't evil, it's simply childish, it's immature, and unfortunately the cause of religion wars. So if we were to see the physics and science behind these things, we could focus on the pure principle and not the personality and the miracle worship. Now, some people think that by recommending, focusing on pure principle, we're ignoring the personal love aspect of spirituality. And actually, the opposite is true, that we strongly suggest that, as the Aboriginals knew well, when you're coherent with respect to the electric field of ancestral memory, you feel loved. And that feeling doesn't require personality worship or miracle worship. It can be an understanding of where the charge of ancestral memory is possible. The Kogis and the Aboriginals, they knew where to make phone calls to ancestors, and they always went to the song lines or where the magnetic lines crossed, and that created that longitudinal embedding, and that's where they made phone calls to ancestors. And ancestral memory, that collective unconscious electric field of the fractal longitudinal array, heaven, is physics, and it's fractal. And there are some places where it works well, like strong magnetic line crossings and sacred sites, and some places where it works very badly inside of metal, steel, and aluminum buildings full of electrosmog and bad air. No, I'm sorry, that longitudinal array is very weak in those places, for exactly the same physics reason why the Schumann harmonics are not there. So, big picture. Actually, the physics reveals how and why the collective unconscious can be very loving. It's loving in the same way, an eagle's eye from a very high perspective is very, shamans say it's a ruthless kind of vision, but it's not actually ruthless. It's simply focused on survival memory. And the library of that survival memory means that if you try to take some memory through death or into a lucid dream or into a bliss experience, which is not shareable, that the electricity of that wave, of that memory, cannot propagate. It literally generates heat, which is more than metaphor for what the Christians call going to hell. Because when you try to do compression, you don't have fractal symmetry, you generate heat. And that is clearly the physics of hell. So isn't it cool? Not only do we have the physics of heaven here, we have the physics of hell. So back to the big picture. So we're we are saying that the experience of the spiritual using physics can be a profoundly loving experience, but that love, like a real parent's love, is focused on the grounded, if we could say the practical, on what the real survival mechanism is. And so when we understand the compression algorithm fractality, phase conjugation, which enables entry into the longitudinal and therefore the spiritual, we understand better how to participate in that loving experience. Anyway, so then back to the science here. This is something that we didn't explain well in the earlier film here from the Physics of Kundalini article. The Physics of Kundalini article is goldenmean.info/Kundalini. And here we're depicting the low frequency harmonics here in green, the frequencies which are extensively studied in the sacrocranial literature, showing the physics of what enables the sacrocranial, the liquids of the spine liquid, to pump. And as Upledger proved, did we say, it is clinically impossible to be depressed if your spine liquid is pumping. And what is also clear is the spine liquid pump is the snake charmer, literally the motor of Kundalini, which then drives that ventricle horns and that explosion in the high brain and all the fun stuff, the bliss of Kundalini. So sacrocranial pump is the physics of Kundalini. And I was in Ben Bentoff's lab, stalking the wild pendulum, when we measured capacitive accelerometrically the phase lock of the spine liquid pump to the ventricle liquids horns ringing, the ringing you hear in your ears during Kundalini, we know so well. He measured those frequencies, we'll see the chart in a minute, of the ringing in the ear, the song of the ancestors, Sangre All, a song in the blood. And so here we're looking at, in green, the published known frequencies of the spine liquid pump, called the long tidal, 0.01 hertz here, and then the mid tidal, 0.041 hertz, and then the what's called the Mayer wave, which is the most probably important frequency in the body, the 0.1 hertz, because it's the key resonance frequency of the blood. And note over here the heart rate variability, HRV, the LF and HF components of the HRV center precisely on these frequencies. The 0.0959 hertz and 0.251 hertz, the LF and HF component of heart rate variability, is the medical tool to analyze your health using your heart harmonics. So notice that these frequencies in red here, the known frequencies that allow the spine liquid to pump, and note that it is a caduceus and that Hermes was right, it's called phase conjugation. Specifically, if you take my original equation, defined origin of biologic negentropy, also the title of my book at fractalfield.com, that the frequencies in red here correspond almost perfectly to the frequencies in green from the sacrocranial physics. So, in fact, my equation, Planck length and time times integer exponents golden ratio, the phase conjugate equation, to which all these other frequencies, like brain frequencies and planet frequencies, they all line up on this perfect line of implosive negentropy, the way out of chaos. Now, the universe is not condemned to entropy. Your physics teacher is wrong, because anything that gets on that wave can implode and become negentropic. Alive, mindful, recursive, fractal, embedded. You know, entanglement is popular in physics these days, but that's actually embedding perfected, which is the problem phase conjugation solves. So anyway, the point is, here is your spine liquid pumping, and when that harmonic cascade completes itself, you get this experience of density. Now, we could talk about what the point here is to talk about what that feels like and what the hygiene to get there is about. Here is Bentoff's earlier pictures showing the capacitive accelerometer. It's basically just the body becomes the dielectric in the plates of a capacitor, and micromotion is measurable, the low frequency infrasound of the body. And those harmonics is how he measured that when the heart becomes coherent, the brainwave liquids obey. and that is mapped upon the homunculus on the brain surface. So you feel this electric you feel this electric lightning bolt going up your tailbone, but they say, well, is it all in your head? Well, it's both, because what you're feeling triggering up your spine liquid, first your tailbone and then your heart, then your throat, and then you feel it burning on the top of your head, is actually mapped perfectly to the way that magnetic toroid is triggering the homunculus, the map of the sites on the brain surface. So and this then further fits the physics of how we've worked this out in our Flame and Sound app, part of flameandmind.com. And here's a summary prepared by Patrick Baughty from our Flame and Sound harmonics, implosive harmonics, which are the driver in flameandmind.com, the audio implosive sound, pure implosion sound. You can read more at fractalfield.com/implosion sound. And you see the chart of the harmonics from my equation predict the key frequencies of the Schumann resonance. It predicts the key frequencies of alpha, theta, beta in brainwave harmonics. It predicts the key frequencies of the heart rate variability, the craniosacral over on the far right. So you see that implosive cascade is rather universal. And here, this is just another picture you have all seen from how my equation predicts all these variables on this line. Notice it starts with 3 exact radii of hydrogen, and that adenosine diphosphate, perhaps the most important molecule in the body. Here we had the picture up here. Here is the ADP to ATP. It's the motor of cell metabolism. The adenosine diphosphate molecule, ADP, at 1.91 angstroms. That wavelength of ADP, which is how we measured Kundalini in the microwave, thanks to Dratch, you can measure the microwave with ADP in the spine bone and measure bliss in Kundalini. It's so cool. The body's microwave of ADP, predicted by my equation 1.91 angstroms, is symbiotic to the microwave conductivity of the planet. We proved it. You take that same microwave scanner and scan the horizon, and you can see that the Earth grid is profoundly tuned in the microwave to biologic microwave from adenosine diphosphate. There's a reason for that, because the Earth grid is a phase conjugate implosive oscillator, dodeca, etc. So you can actually measure the microwave components of the collective unconscious. It works. Thank you, Bob Dratch. So yes, all those things fit together pretty cool. Now, we were going to talk about the hygiene and the experience, and that's where this is going next. First, to make the hygiene sound like more fun, let's talk about the experience. So that when I was 21, I think, I had just I had gone off the deep end and was certifiably insane, according to my parents, because I quit one of the best jobs on the planet. I was a systems analyst with IBM, Chicago O2D, and I had trained in Poughkeepsie in Chicago and had a lot of fun. And what did I do? I quit that to go back to graduate school, study psychophysiology, and go to the Kirchhoff School, claymont.org in West Virginia. So there I was, double Scorpio, and I guess I'm pretty much a virgin. And I had a lot of conserved sexual energy, as well as, a lot of Scorpio energy. And instead of living in the big city, oh God, Detroit, I moved to George Washington's nephew's pig farm in West Virginia, Charlestown, West Virginia, claymont.org, and started building a barn and working in the garden every day and ate cosmic food. And then we did the Gurdjieff gymnastics. So I was sort of like, I guess you could say, a ripe, fertile ground for Kundalini. And so I began to feel these, I would feel a kind of a stillness here that, if you sit still long enough, you can feel kind of a crackle if you try to move. And then as you move your attention along your body, we now know the physics that your attention is actually electrically centripetal, which is the definition of being God. Hello, yes, I have blasphemed. You too can be God, and you need to be, because in physics, the physics of creation is specifically the ability to get centripetal. The alternative is get dead. So I say, try the former, not the latter. Get centripetal or get dead, which is a corollary to get fractal or get dead. Anyway, so as you move your attention up and down your spine, you create a centripetal force. And so the wave tends to become still at that point. It's like, how do you catch a wave, How do you catch a cloud and called Maria. It's a similar story. So the stillness creates implosion, and perfect implosion is perfect relaxation. So given the golden ratio times Planck symmetry of the universe, the definition of perfected relaxation is perfected embedding in that system. Perfected embedding in that system is golden ratio times Planck, because there's no other way to get fractal. So, in effect, that's why perfecting relaxation is the perfection of electrical conductivity. And later, when we learn the physics of superconductivity, you know, when this gold atomic nano thread of gold, you zap it with lightning, it becomes a superconductor, exactly like the thread that is DNA during human bliss. We know all that physics. It's actually measurable. It's so fun. But the point being that you need to be in the business of learning perfected relaxation. Now, I had a little advantage in that regard, because in high school, when I was a kid, our friend Greg decided that we were going to demonstrate stage hypnosis. Yes, there you are. I'm hypnotized. I'm on stage. My neck is on the back of one chair, my feet are on the other. And we were doing stage hypnosis when I was in high school. And how did we learn stage hypnosis? Perfecting relaxation. So anyway, when you perfect that kind of relaxation, you begin to feel this sort of implosive wave. And the science behind that, what you feel inside, is you feel a compression, and it begins to feel like a tickle of lightning up your tailbone. And we now know the physics, the vestigial horsehairs of the tailbone, we wouldn't call horsehairs, but it's a hairy, and they're microtubule waveguides for the microwave and high frequency ultrasonic and UV components that are then gathered, and literally the tailbone becomes a straw, and that really sucks. it draws, and this is where the conversation about conserved sexual energy arises. You know, Gurdjieff had it part of this right when he said that you know, sometimes you need to express the sexual energy, because if it's blocked, it turns to poison and cancer and all kinds of bad stuff. It's true. However, particularly when you're young, you need some of the pressure of that conserved sexual energy to break through that wall and that pump and go upward. That's why it is a bit of a tragedy when young people leak their sexual energy too early, and there's no compression to go up the spine liquid. And it doesn't just motorize Kundalini and all the cool stuff exploding, you know, burning fountain out your crown, which I experienced for many years. But it also is the driver for creative juices in general. So, you know, it's true. They say that cancer is the failure to distribute charge, and young people who have sex too young are like a cancer cell procreating. There is that parallel, but the physics is of the need to generate the necessary pressure to drive that fluid upward and create that burning fountain, as it were. And by the way, Burning Fountain was one of the original, you know, books on the origin of myth. It's a beautiful parallel. So what happened to me was that I began to feel increasing, and it is, especially in the early phases, it's increasingly erotic, actually. And then it creates a dripping sweet nectar that does drip down from your brain stem, and you can taste it in the back of your mouth. It's true. Although a correlate of that experience, and this is many, many months of experience, and it got more and more dense, and everybody has a different story, but the parallels reflect the physics, is that, as I say, I cried, I wept for many months. To tell the story, you know, I lived in Eden, New York, and I would be driving to work on this beautiful tree-lined road, and I remember for almost every day driving down that road, there'd be tears just rolling down my cheek, and I was having bliss. But what I was letting go of was every memory of pain, every memory of anger, every memory of what is not shareable. So I was doing the activity that compression requires, which is to sort the waves to which ones are distributable or fractal, which is why real heart coherence is a useful electrical way to measure pure intention, in which you can, it's a functional lie detector, because that's realheartcoherence.com, and it's a functional way to measure kinesiology, they measure arm strength. And in fact, that your heart, by discovering what is maximum coherence, and the final form of coherence is obviously fractal and perfected phase conjugate Rose-like charge distribution. So by increasingly becoming compressible, you increasingly become shareable. and it's, well, perhaps, I don't know whether it was cause or effect, but in fact, at that time, as an electrical engineer studying the physics of consciousness, I was consciously aware that the only thing I ever wanted to be thinking about was pure principle. I would consider it somewhat of a waste of time if somebody said, oh, here, I want you to study tax law or the history of whatever. Well, what I wanted to do was study pure principle of what allowed wave mechanics to happen from the inside. I wanted to ride that wave. It's the Einstein urge. Well, and I'm not saying that tax law couldn't reflect pure principle, but you have to get a long way from the physics of what makes abundance to human tax law. I mean, there's quite a distance. So if you spent your life, the last 100 lifetimes studying tax law, probably you didn't get a whole lot of pure principle. Now, I'm not criticizing tax accountants. What I'm saying is that, at the moment of death, tax law is not going to matter too much. But what is going to matter is which memories contain survival information, which the hologram of the collective fractal unconscious has been collecting for 1 billion years. And you don't get in there unless. So what did that mean in my case? Well, I don't call them past life memories. I call them fragments of soul memory, whatever language. But how do I say it? I went to the Andes and Machu Picchu, and I went to Findhorn, and when I laid down in the sarcophagus of the Great Pyramid, the lights went out, and then when I walked in the gold sarcophagus of Tutankhamun, I fainted. And to say it was my memory, or I consider it a little bit humorous. They put 3 of the persons who believed they were Jesus in one room and turned on a microphone and made the famous book, The Three Christs of Ypsilanti. Well, why does everybody believe they were Jesus or Mary, or, why did I believe I was Tutankhamun? I didn't really believe I was Tutankhamun, but I knew I embedded in the deep magnetic conscious memory of Tutankhamun at that moment, which is real. And it's not so much as it my memory, it is a physics fact that deep and powerful emotions leave a shadow in the auric field of the house or the planet, and where that deep emotional experience leaves a node in the longitudinal array which others can tap. It's like a library. So there I was. Well, then at that point I remembered how to put this. When I was a kid, I got so upset when Superman got out his super ring, and he put on this ring, and then he'd become Superman. And it bothered me so much that I had to, hide myself from the TV. Well, of course, I couldn't stand Lassie because it was too scary, too. So, but I had memories of how the crystals were used. And I recognized later that had to do with the Atlantean fire crystal story, and we wrote papers on the physics of Atlantean fire crystals with Lewis Acker, and you can read about that somewhere. So that's a bit of another story. Point being that I knew at that time also how Tutankhamun's body, how his blood, how his person was used to control the flooding of the Nile. And I got into a deep study about that, and I realized that, yes, Sat Prem was right in the willed mutation of the species that after 100 generations of pharaohs, knowing they will get fired if they can't make rain, because if the Nile doesn't flood as a pharaoh, you get fired. It's really very, very simple. And so after 100 generations of that, the kids of the pharaohs knew how to make rain. Well, you know, it's simple evolutionary physics. It's the pressure. And the physics is, it has to do with when Rolling Thunder made rain, he would tickle the underbelly of a certain black beetle. And it took me some years of studying. Egypt would be a scarab. It took me some years to figure out that the fractality of the nervous system of that particular beetle was profoundly implosive. Anyway, so later I learned how to use pine cones to tickle clouds and studied the physics of Wilhelm Reich and realized it was a 60-degree cone that was used by Trevor Constable in weather engineering on the high seas, which is the stellation of the dodeca, which makes implosion. And so I understood the physics of why this Kundalini experience would often have an effect on the weather. And there is a famous story, and you can read about this at goldenmean.info/rain. We were in Australia, and there had been a drought there, and Mullumbimby, Byron for months, and I was just sick of it. It's too damn dry here. So Valerie and I went on the porch. I said, Valerie, I'm going to sit here and I'm going to do this Kundalini. And I really burnt my chakras and burnt my eye. And I felt the lightning and the implosion. And to make a long story short, I mean, it was a flood. It wasn't rain. It was a flood. And even recently, this is in honor of the flames approaching the houses on the U.S. West Coast right now. I'm telling the story. So our friend Amar from Brazil, thanks to Valerie on this, had called us. The flames are coming to the house. We got to do something fast. And I said, well, take the kids out front and show them how to make a labyrinth with stones. We had done this at Cannes one time, and they had the biggest storm in 10 years. But he took the kids out and showed me paramagnetic stone, make a labyrinth, 7 turns inside, do the labyrinth, goldenmean.info/labyrinth. And so the kids went out there and they did this thing. And 3 days later, he called us. He said, well, I don't know, 3 days. So a desperate call. Please tell us how to stop the rain. And I said, no, I warned you before I gave you this information that we do not provide that service. No, we can tell you how to start the rain. But me, when I was Tutankhamun, when I have memories of Tutankhamun, whatever you want to call it, I did not learn how to stop rain. Sorry, I learned how to start it. Well, the physics. It's really quite simple. Here's a kid who is barefoot in the mud, and they're happy, and they're healthy. Most likely they can look at a cloud, and if they ask permission, they can put a hole in the cloud with their mind. Now, we've explained that physics 100 times, but we need to explain it 101 times, so here goes. So water vapor does not have permission to touch. Permission to touch. There's a metaphor. To become a droplet without a centripetal electric field. You see, what makes water vapor, the clouds, the water vapor, decide to become a water vapor droplet? Well, something centripetal, a seed. Now, because silver iodide has a certain range, but the focus of a child's mind, you get the flavor. So I had this experience, and then I began to work with Vincent Bridges, and I learned more about how John Dee had prepared for a year on the 7 hills of Prague to make the storm that took out the Spanish Armada, later called the Tempest. And you should see our lovely new screenplay for John Dee and Alchemy there. The link's at fractalfield.com. So I learned, this storm was, he had informed Queen Elizabeth a year ahead of time he was going to make that storm. And the meteorology of that storm out of the North Sea was extremely unusual. And the Spanish sailors still stranded on the shores of Ireland are still telling that story today. Their children. And so with Vincent Bridges and the Ophanim work, we worked at Red Rocks and did these rituals. And, I say, study this goldenmean.info/Ophanim and recognize that the large elemental beings who are simply intelligent plasma, whose bodies are made of symmetry, exactly why ball lightning responds so well to telepathy. It's a toroid, a conjugate core. that these plasma beings consider humans insanely drunk because we do not talk to them. And therefore, our storms should be out of control until we recognize our relationship to large plasma beings. And this is physics. Okay, so I'm going to get off my stump here now, and I'm going to conclude. We need to conclude at some point, I think, and talk about the hygiene. So remember, thousands, maybe millions, probably millions of people have had various forms of Kundalini experiences. Mine is just one. It's actually minor. But the physics is instructive, and that's why we're here. Now, the hygiene, it boils down ultimately to one simple physics, and that is, can you implode charge? It is not more complicated than that. It means that your clothing will be natural fabric and loose. Probably hemp is best because of the dielectric constant. That you will, quote unquote, religiously avoid putting metal on or near your body to the extent possible. Well, titanium is better than most, but actually titanium is pretty good for rituals. Long story. But generally, and gold and silver is not too bad. But, you know, most metals on your body are the wrong dielectric. So if you had too many coins in your pocket, you notice they get hot disproportionately fast. You know why? Because they're eating your aura. So take the damn coins out of your pocket. You know, render unto Caesar what's Caesar's. So the hygiene. So that is just a little bit about diet. And of course, read the book Earthing and understand about grounding. And that tells you a lot of what kind of shoes you're allowed to wear. They should be thin and natural, et cetera, because you need the capacitance of earth ground. And if you have access to the Schumann harmonics, which you now know are phase conjugate implosive, you have a phase relationship to the earth, which enables your inertia to be in phase with. The definition of grounding is the same for electricians as it is for psychologists. And it's critical. And the book Earthing proves, you know, all these diseases go away so fast if you're barefoot in the mud. Why? And, you know, big, thick sneakers in a modern city with electrosmog everywhere, they're going to kill you, because you never get access to Schumann. Hello, that's the phase relationship of the collective unconscious. So you turned off the inner telephone. Oops, you need grounding. Just to mention the dietary aspect. So basically, the reason you feel sick when you eat, you know, GMO and foods that have been monocultured, most wheat, corn, and soy now, sadly, is because that DNA is screaming in pain because of being torn from the root of embedding. And so if you ask your broccoli, when was the last time you experienced monoculture before you pick which broccoli or which grain to eat, you get a flavor. So remember, the Hopi corn was, you know, you could talk to it, you could sing to it, it would decide whether to germinate. The Hopi, and I saw the corn flower of grandfather Dan, I saw it call the wind many times. I saw that cornmeal call the wind. I understand exactly why that cornmeal would call the wind. And I want to thank Susan Ambrose, my partner at that time, for her relationship with the Hopi and all that story. And Luke Gatto also, close to, I was fortunate to be taught by the indigenous peoples, trial Nietzsche the Senecas. So the physics of why that corn powder could call the rain is, you know, 1,000 generations of being the family pet. That DNA in that corn was a family pet for hundreds of generations. And so that DNA wouldn't germinate until you sang the right song. That was a family pet. Now that was corn DNA, but what you got today, it'll kill you. I mean, it's mucus, and the DNA is intelligent, that corn, and it's been in jail for 1,000 generations, and it's screaming in pain. As soon as you put that DNA in your mouth, you get a pile of mucus, which is your immune system saying, not self, pain, pain, pain. So why do you eat monoculture? Do not. So live food, et cetera, live oils. You know, we're not going to do the whole conversation about nutrition, but you get the flavor here that you need to eat happy DNA, or your DNA is not going to get happy inside your body. So we're coming to a conclusion of this conversation. We wanted to just suggest that there's a practical relationship between the physics of Kundalini and the physics of Ascension, the physical next dimension, versus your body simply getting charge implosive and spin dense enough You know, I got very insulted when these blooming Pleiadian Swaru, they come on there for 100 different videos. They're telling us, well, we Pleiadians are 5D and you humans are 3D, so you damn well better be humble. And yet not one word did they say about what it means to be 5D. And here I'm telling you as an electrical engineer exactly what it means. That means your lucid dreaming are coherent enough that you can move around the nodes at a distance, which every Aboriginal knows. And that's called your mind. That's a big enough flower. So thank you very much. I hope you had fun. To be continued, fractalfield.com. Dan Winter here, signing out.